Hello and welcome to Just One More Watch. Welcome today to my better late than never review of the new Seiko Alpinist. It's not really that new anymore though, is it? But before I get into it, a few shout outs are in order today. First of all, a big shout out to my good friends Rick and Ricky over at the Scottish Watches podcast. They recently became the first watch related podcast to hit the momentous milestone of 200 episodes recorded. Congratulations to you guys. Scottish Watches taking over the world one rolled R at a time. Talking of which, I recently appeared on a podcast with Rob and the Regulator, two well-known characters from the Australian watch scene. Rob owns Geneva Blue, he's a distributor and importer of various brands, and the Regulator, also known as Alex, is a fellow Scotsman who works as a watchmaker in Perth. We had a lot of fun over the course of 2 hours talking about cocktails, Scotland, football, and occasionally watches. I'll leave a link to the podcast in the description of the video. I will also leave a link to another Zoomcast that I did recently. I've been spreading myself around a bit with Miguel and P. Ross. Miguel runs SOCAL Watch Reviews. P. Ross runs Ross Wrist Watch Love. You've got to be careful how you pronounce that one. The watch is rather important. Those guys were fantastic. I had such a lot of fun chatting to them about anything, no holds barred, anything goes over the course of an hour or so. Do me a favour, please check the links in the description, check out both of their channels. It's really hard to get the ball rolling in the early days, so if you like what you see, give them a sub. I'm sure they would much appreciate it. Miguel does fantastic things, operating literally out of a cupboard using minimal equipment, proving once again you don't have to have a film crew and a brand manager to make great watch content on YouTube. And P. Ross, what can I say? A fellow Star Wars fan, and if you've never seen a man dancing with 2 Casio Royales on his wrists, well, you haven't lived, have you? Final shout out before I get into the watch is to the owner of the watch, Jason. Jason loaned me the 2 Timex Marlins that I looked at a couple of weeks ago, and he also loaned me this delicious little Alpinist. Thank you very much, mate. So, the Seiko Alpinist then, finally. What do you think of the Seiko Alpinist? I reckon it's one of these watches that even if you don't own one and have never owned one, you've probably got a fully formed and fairly strong opinion about the watch. The old one was all over YouTube for a period there. They got discontinued, they then released a new Alpinist, which is very, very similar in most regards, a little bit different in a few key areas as will be discussed. Perhaps the gold hands, cathedral hands and green dial of the original weren't for everybody. They've toned it down with the new ones whilst retaining some of that character. Does that mean that people who avoided the OG should jump in and buy one? Let's flip the camera and find out. Okay, I suppose I should start with a bit of a clarification and perhaps something of an apology. When I refer to the Alpinist, the old one, the OG or the original, what I'm really referring to is the Seiko SARB 017. This, the kind of classic, in my eyes anyway, green dialed, gold hand and indexed Alpinist that they made from 2006 to 2018. However, that does the Alpinist name a bit of a disservice, and I guess in doing so it does Seiko a bit of a disservice as well. They have been making watches under that brand, under the sub-brand, since the early 1960s and since the early 1990s with the classic inner rotating compass bezel and cathedral hand look that is now synonymous with the Alpinist name. However, I still think that when you say Alpinist, in most people's mind's eye, they will see the SARB 017. So what did Seiko do? In typical Seiko fashion, they discontinued the SARB 017 a couple of years ago. They waited about a year and then they released a range of watches that are very similar, if slightly different, offering a couple more features but costing quite a bit more money. The SPB 119 is the one inside the box, that's the one that Jason has bought. The SPB 121 is the most similar to the SARB 017, if you see what I mean. It's got the green dial and the gold hands. The SPB 123 has a cream dial, gold hands and a vintage style strap. There is also the SPB 117, which is similar but different. It's on a bracelet, slightly different dial pattern. It deletes the Arabics and replaces them with shark's teeth instead. And just to confuse matters further, Seiko recently launched the SPB 155, 157 and 159, dubbed Baby Alpinists, with a fixed bezel, no inner rotation and slightly smaller than the previous ones. Now they've just been released, you can expect to see one reviewed on the channel maybe towards the end of 2021. And just to muddy the waters further, before I get into the box, you can still buy the SARB 017, there's plenty of stock seemingly still available. Japan, USA and elsewhere, 475 USD, the price they were 2 years ago when they were discontinued. So you have another quandary. Is it worth buying one of the new ones over one of the old ones? Well, let's have a look at one of the new ones then and see if we can determine whether or not it is worth it. Well, I think the first question that always has to be asked when you review a Seiko Alpinist is, what exactly is it? It's often referred to as the Japanese explorer because of a similar connection to mountaineering. I guess it can be described as a tool watch. This 119 I think is the dressiest of the four current variants. It's got the cream dial, kind of cream champagne dial with silver hands and indexes, not quite as polarizing as the gold, and it is on a stitched black leather strap. I think this is the most formal of the four different colorways. I guess it's for people with slightly smaller than average wrists or for people who prefer a slightly smaller than average watch. This one is 39.5mm in diameter, who appreciate the utility of a tool watch with sapphire crystal and 200 meters of water resistance and a screw down crown, but don't necessarily appreciate the looks of a dive watch. That's kind of where I've always thought the Alpinist fits in. I don't think it's a watch that fits into a small collection. I think it's a watch that fits into quite a large collection. I know Jason has a fairly big collection. I think it's a bit too polarizing to be one of 3 or 4 watches in a box. I think it's fine if you're looking for something a little left field, something a bit different in a box of say 10 or 12. That is where I see the Alpinist strength. So I already talked about the diameter, 39.5. It's a bit thicker than the old one, coming in at about 13.3 as opposed to under 13. Display case back I think makes this one jut out a little more than it used to. Still got a compact lug to lug of 47 though, and 20mm lug width on the supplied strap, and they have added a nice new deployant which you didn't get with the old models. This one weighs in at 83 grams. All stainless steel construction. Now I've already talked about the sapphire crystal. You can just see here a bit of purple reflecting off my studio lights. That is an improvement on the outgoing model. They have put anti-reflective undercoating on the sapphire this time. So 3-piece construction, high polish stainless steel fixed bezel. Now the side of the case is high polished. The upper lug edges are brushed, and we have a screw on display case back. I'll show you that in a minute or two. Mostly high polished surfaces on this one. Dual crowns, another Seiko Alpinist range signature. Now the second crown, the 4 o'clock crown, does not screw down. That operates the inner compass bezel. I'll show you that in more detail in a second. The 3 o'clock crown is the kind of traditional crown that adjusts the movement, and it is screwed down as I said earlier on. 200 meters of water resistance with this one. High polished stainless steel screw on case back with a Hardlex display, so sapphire in the front, but Seiko's mineral crystal Hardlex in the back. Do you know what? Jason has very generously left us a little sticker. I'm not sure how long he's had this one, but maybe he just missed that. I always do love peeling off a sticker for our entertainment. Give me a second here, folks. Oh, there we go. Look at that. Bit of a bonus. Revealing the 6R35 movement. This is my first encounter with the 35. Seen plenty of 6R15s. That used to be the one powering the SARB 033, the 017 and the 065 and various others. This is a new updated version, so 24 dual hacking and hand winding. The big improvement here though is an improvement in the power reserve from 50 hours to 70 hours. That is actually genuinely useful. That means that if you're going to be wearing this dressy version, the 119, on your wrist Monday to Friday as an office watch, you can take it off on a Friday, pop it back on a Monday, and it will still be ticking away, hopefully pretty accurately. Let's get it on the timegrapher. Yeah, so that's pretty good. Thank you very much. That's a decent set of numbers if you were planning on running one of these as a daily +4, +5, +6 seconds per day with a healthy amplitude and an acceptable beat error considering this is a fairly box fresh unit. So 21,600 vibrations per hour. It is a 3 Hz movement. It doesn't have that smooth high beat sweep you get from a 4 Hz, 28,800 vibrations per hour. watch, but the advantage of that in theory is less servicing. Because it runs at a slower rate, there's less wear and tear on the internal components, meaning you're not going to need to service this one as often as you would a high-beat auto. But let's get back to the dial and hands, because that really is where this watch is either made or broken. Not as polarizing as the green and gold one, that is for sure, but not everyone is going to appreciate semi-skeletonized, segmented cathedral hands with syringe tips and a mixture of Arabics and arrowheads on the dial. And let's not forget the inner rotating compass bezel. Definitely a bit of an odd complication, that one. One other change on this new series is the return of the Cyclops. The 017 didn't have it, but previous generation Alpinists did. Kind of pros and cons to Cyclopses. I'm a bit neutral, a bit ambivalent on them myself. It certainly makes it easier to read the date though. So applied Arabics at the evens and applied arrowhead indexes at the odds. Seiko logo applied under the 12 and just the Prospex X, because the Alpinist has been shifted into the Prospex lineup of watches with this incarnation, and automatic in the italic scripts and 20 bar 200 meters of water resistance. All of these Alpinist range that I've been talking about are Japan made, as well, as you can see there. Now you can say what you like about the handset, but they are very, very well proportioned. They really do fit the dial beautifully. Those little syringe tips to the hour hand, the minute hand and the second hand, exactly coordinating with the parts of the dial that you would expect them to. And there is a fair degree of lume on the hands and on the indexes as well. I'll put the lume video in now. Lume Bright always puts on a pretty good show for itself. Don't expect dive watch standards. There are compromises to be made when you move away from that style of watch, and lesser lume is generally one of those. And it would have been nice if they had put a double circle at the 12 o'clock just to help with orientation after dark. But considering the style of the watch, I reckon this amount of lume is perfectly appropriate. But what about the other signature feature? What about that bi-directional inner rotating compass bezel operated by the second crown down there at the 4 o'clock? Well, this is the second Alpinist that I've had on loan and the second time that I haven't been bothered to learn how to work the compass. Not much call for it in Sydney city centre, I have to say. I'm not sure how many people will be learning how to work the compass bezel. I think if you were actually using this watch as a genuine mountaineering tool, you'd probably have one compass in your backpack and probably a spare compass just in case you had a problem with your first compass. But it should be regarded as a kind of novel complication, and a bit of extra complexity to the dial adds a bit of extra colour here and there also, very much in the way that a tachymeter scale features on a chronograph dial, but you're probably not going to use the tachymeter scale all that often. On wrist, the Alpinist does wear well thanks to a nice and compact set of dimensions, as previously noted. This one does feel perhaps a little bit more top heavy than the previous version. Maybe it's because of that extra mil of thickness due to the display case back. I think also this strap is fairly box fresh. I'm sure it would sit nicer on my wrist if the strap had a bit more wear and tear on it. I reckon the vintage style leather on the 123 is the one to go for if you're looking for on wrist comfort though. That looks like it's going to be softer and more compliant than either of the other two leather strap options. I do like this little Seiko branded deployant here. Definitely a step forward from previous generations. It's the same one as featured on the Seiko Cocktail Time, the Negroni model that I looked at about 6 weeks or so ago now. Pushers on the side, actually if you push them you can do two different things. You can open the deployant and you can also open this, allowing you to adjust it. But in operation you kind of press it once to open and then a second time if you want to adjust it. A nice neat little piece of design, and like I said, definitely a step forward from previous gen models which just had a plain unsigned buckle and tang. And that's the proper overhead. Silver hands on a champagne dial, never going to be the most legible. But then again, it's not a dive watch, so again, that's one of those little compromises you're going to have to accept if you are moving towards this style of tool watch rather than an out-and-out diver as your daily. Outside, it's a hot and sunny day today in Sydney today, and the anti-reflective undercoating really coming into its own, making it much easier to read than if it weren't there at all. Similarly, the Cyclops, you can see the difference it makes when you want a quick at-a-glance reading of the date wheel. On wrist, compact 47 lug to lug and properly downward pointing lugs means the Alpinist wears nicely on my 7-inch wrist. It's going to wear nicely on wrists, I would say, down to about 6 inches, perhaps even less. That's always been a real strength of this model. So Seiko clearly has taken a couple of steps forward with the Alpinist range for this current series. The anti-reflective undercoating on the Sapphire is a welcome addition, for example, as is that new deployant clasp, a mile better than the previous ones. Similarly, 6R35, extra 20-hour power reserve over the 6R15 that it replaced. Again, very, very welcome addition there. However, I think there have been a few steps taken backwards as well. Cyclops, you can take that one or leave that one. I'll give that a pass today. Unsigned crown, the main crown at the 3 o'clock there, unsigned. On the old models, it used to have the Seiko S. I reckon for the price they're charging for these, that is a bit cheap. I don't like it when Seiko do that, when they upgrade a model in inverted commas, and yet they de-spec it in certain areas. Plus, it would be good if you were buying a watch at this price and the inner rotating compass bezel, which is its USP, actually all lined up. Check the north, okay? I'm going to line it up bang on the 12 o'clock. Cast your eyes down to the south. It's squint. Typical Seiko. And then there is that price. Remember the Sarbo 17s, the outgoing model that I referred to earlier on, still available on Amazon.com for $475 USD. The cheapest I could find, the SPB 121, which is the green and gold variant of the new version, on eBay, where you generally have a better spread of pricing, was $700. Is it worth paying $200 more for the extra little features, the 20-hour power reserve, the Cyclops that may be a bit controversial, the unsigned crown, the deployant clasp? I'm not sure. So my recommendation on this new Seiko Alpinist range is that you shop hard if you're keen on one of these. You shouldn't be paying list, you should not be paying anything like list, and even then hang out for Black Friday type sales, Father's Day sales, whatever kind of sales is necessary. I think you should be looking for around $500 US for any of these. I don't reckon they're worth all that much more than that, to be quite frank. So there you have it, the new but not really all that new Seiko Alpinist then. Thank you again to Jason for loaning me his. I think if you liked the old one, if you liked the look of the old one but weren't all that convinced as to how often you would wear a green dialed watch with gold cathedral hands, maybe there is something to be said for these slightly more discreet white dialed, black dialed new models. I just wish Seiko wouldn't keep cranking the price up as they have been over the last couple of years. If you can pick up one of these on special, on a flash sale or something, I still think there's value to be had. Full price, I'm not as convinced as I was with the old one. Thank you for watching. I will see you in a future video.